Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild adventure Minotaur's Bane, designed by JVC Parry and Phil Beckwith for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shout out to my platinum patrons Andrew, Brian, and Richard, and gold patrons RPG Papercrafts and Charming Grenade. Thank you all so much for your support. So I actually have reviewed the previous adventures in the Minotaur trilogy by PB Publishing with mixed results. I believe I was kind of mostly negative on the first one, and the second one I liked. I thought it was a big improvement and kind of just a big dungeon crawl, and it was pretty enjoyable. This one is amazing! I really, really love it. This is probably one of the most exciting, interesting, fun adventures that I have looked at the DM's Guild in quite some time. It's incredibly epic. It's very action-packed. It uses a lot of really fun ideas and concepts and some really neat ways of doing a dungeon crawl. Big thumbs up. We're going to go through it. Minotaur's Bane is designed for a party of 8th level heroes who have completed the first two. And really, I have very few complaints, and this is not really a complaint, but it's just an important note to make, is that this one would be very difficult to run as a one-shot at all. And I think that was something I mentioned in the second one also, is that one thing, this is a trilogy. Like, it does build upon things that happened in the earlier ones. And in the second one I mentioned the fact that, like, yeah, it does build upon the first one. I didn't particularly like the first one that much, but it still uses those characters. And this one does that even more. Like, it uses characters and events to where it picks up right where the second one lets off. Like, the second one, you're walking away from destroying the orc stronghold and defeating it and recovering this banner, and all of a sudden this character comes up from the human town and is like, oh, look, that banner is super cursed and evil. It's a sign of Baphomet, the prince of beasts. And your Minotaur buddy Perseus throws it to the ground, and it just opens this giant rift in the land that creates this really cool, like, eternal, I think it's really called, like, eternal battlefield. It's a demonic demiplane where orcs and minotaurs are just battling each other in eternal warfare. And the theme here is very nice. It's very demon-themed, very Castlevania-esque, very, like, Warcraft of, like, orcs versus humans, although here it's orcs versus minotaurs. Dragonlance themes. I like all those things, by the way. I like, I love the high fantasy, like, warfare action, like, all that is good stuff, and it's very, very well used here. Let's just go to that first. And unfortunately, the intro, and thankfully, there's not much of an intro here. It does the silly thing of literally this character walking up and essentially just the DM kind of telling the players, like, what's going on and what's about to happen, which is this abyssal rift being opened up. It doesn't really have a good adventure synopsis. It doesn't tell you. There needs to be an adventure summary in front of every adventure that just tells you, okay, here's what this adventure's about, here's what's going to happen, here's the general path the players should go on, and here's the end. This one doesn't do that at all. I had to read the whole adventure to figure out what actually happened and what it's all about. So kind of a little bit of a fail there, but not to where I'm going to really, like, condemn the adventure for that. By the way, this is a giant adventure. I think it's, what is the table of contents, 60-some pages, including a pretty good amount of custom NPC monsters. Uses just about every fiend and demon from, the monster manual and Mordenkainen's and all that stuff, as well as some custom fiends of its own, which is very nice to see. I'm going to scroll down to, and the reason I moved my webcam over to the right side is because there's one page that's done as a landscape. One thing I want to mention before I scroll through a lot of this, the artwork and the visual presentation here is top-notch, which is something that I have come to expect from PB Publishing stuff. Like the just little stuff like look at the background here actually has an image in the back, like this cool eye looking out, very like this demon war themed. I like the coloring used here. The background, almost every page has artwork on it. It's got, the classic, what is that, Scaly Sans font, whatever the D&D font is. Like, everything, the visual presentation looks amazing. The artwork is very thematic and evocative of everything that's going on here. You can see that literally, like, there's a great image of this kind of spectral, ongoing eternal warfare. Absolutely fantastic. So the first layer, they literally can climb down. I'm going to scoot down. Here we go. There's the map of the Eternal Battlefield. And by the way, for all the maps included in this game, which all the maps are fantastic, there are separate player maps included. I'm just not going to switch between that and the PDF. I'm going to stay on the PDF, but there are separate player maps available. Now this one, it can be tricky to run it from a virtual tabletop, but I like that it's 1 hex. You can see here, 1 hex equals 60 feet, noted here. And you would basically put everyone in initiative and kind of treat this as a big dungeon crawl. They can move a hex every 2 rounds. They're actually being actively hunted by demons, which is really cool. And there's a ongoing chase mechanic where if they have an encounter that makes the pursuers close in, and then they can do a check to rush ahead of them or stealth or something to make that pursuer. And it's not an unwinnable fight or anything, but it is a pretty big battle that can occur that the players could avoid if they're good about it, which I think is a really fun way of creating a sense of urgency, and the fact that this is a chaotic warfare going on, as well as the fact that every hex they enter is a random encounter that can occur. I think it's a 50% chance of nothing happen, or a 50% chance of either a fight or a cutscene happening, which is which are scenes from the previous adventures in the trilogy, events that happened. Or you could use, and it says one of the things you could do is use a specific player history event that happened with that player, which is very neat. And there are locations on this map too, and a lot of them are locations from the previous locations that players have been to in this trilogy, which is, it's a funny way of repurposing old maps, but on the other hand, it's done really well here. It makes sense that there would be this demonic... essentially, this is the evil afterlife of a lot of what these things occurred, and it's kind of just literally a hell for these characters. And one of the Minotaur leader who was betrayed, Astarte, the leader from the first one, I think this happens halfway through the second one of the Minotaur trilogy, you find her in her hut. This hut is B1, and she's there with a bunch of other cultists and dretch demons, and you have to fight her. And actually, that's where you need to go, because the trapdoor in here leads to the next layer of this Baphomet demiplane. And then there's a B2 is this tower from the Orc stronghold, which now is filled with hill giants squashing demons. You can actually find allies in I think the Rift and the Arena has Orcs and Minotaurs respectively. And there's a rule saying you shouldn't let the party add too many allies, but do let them add Orc and Minotaur allies. And I'm torn between adding too many things to a player group, but in this case, I don't think, I think the Minotaurs are CR5 and the Orcs should be less than that. They're not any stronger than 8th level heroes, and it does fit the theme of warfare. You should be able to gather up your own forces as you battle and there's a lot of battle. I mean, this is extremely combat focused throughout the entire adventure, so I like the fact of the players being able to recruit allies, and that being a good reward for going to these other locations. Because as I said, the only thing they need to do here is go to B1 and then go down. Everything else is just either just horrible things happening, or maybe there is some treasure they can locate. But I like the fact that giving them allies is a good reward for going to these other locations, and allies can be meaningful for... I was going to say the rest of the adventure, except when they reach the next layer, the Minotaur allies go crazy and you have to kill them, which is a bummer. Except for your buddy Perseus. Perseus is the one ally from the Minotaur Trilogy 2, the second one, who you helped in that one, who hopefully survived, because he will survive throughout basically all of this one as long as you can have him with you. But really cool in the Eternal Battlefield. I like the way that's done. And that has its own mini dungeons as well. The poor town, I believe that's from the first in the Minotaur trilogy, has been completely zombified and just undead. There's heads mounted on pikes, and the heads come and attack you, and of course frightens the players. There's 46 zombies in the town. It's just a horde of badness. But I think that fits pretty well. And then you get to the next layer, which is really, really fun. This is the Maze of the Minotaur. You gotta have a maze, right? You're doing Minotaurs. You gotta have a maze. How do you do a maze in D&D, though? How do you do a maze in a tabletop game where literally all the players are looking down on a battle map? And it has a lot of notes about how to do this. Many of the maze chambers are themselves miniature mazes, depending on what your players enjoy. There are a few options on how to use the map for your game table. One of them is just, reveal the map, draw the map on pieces of cards as your players can see them, or just use theater of the mind and have them do survival checks. Obviously, for my group, we use Roll20. What I would do is use these in Roll20, and I would obviously get rid of global illumination, and I would put everybody's vision, even if they have dark vision, to like 5 or 10 feet around them. That way, it really gives off that feeling of you can only see like right in front of you, and that makes everything way spookier and crazier. And I think that would be an interesting way of limiting things. Now you can see the way this maze is organized. It is a bunch of miniature rooms, and I believe this was done in the one of the Tyranny of Dragons dungeons. There was like a wizard's tower or something that did this kind of the same kind of concept where you would like you would have to like I think in that one you like rolled to see which one you ended up in. This one has very specific paths set up. Each of these has a number associated with it, and that number kind of depends on which other maze room you end up in. So you start at 1, and if you actually go south, south or west, you just end right back up in this first room. Which the tricky thing is that if you're doing it literally in Roll20, you would have to make at least 2 of each one ready to drop players onto. So the fact that players can return to the maze, but then the creatures have a 50% chance of spawning when they do. So I would maybe, if they literally go back to that one, you would have to put them in another instance of it to have it make sense. Especially if the party gets split up like that. So you'd have to create multiple instances, which can be painful. Now, the maze, there's not a mention of this, but this could very well turn into a slog pretty quickly because it is all trial and error. There's no real way for your players to suss out. There's magical barriers between each zone, and almost every room has combat in it. It's a lot of demons. It's a lot of foul things happening. One of the areas, if they leave through a certain passage, they come back to that room, and everything that was there is just the undead version of it there, which is very cool. There's a mini boss fight right here in 5, which is Daedalus, of course, the designer of this dungeon. There's 6 is all supposed to be like pure blackness, and they just reach out and feel like skulls, on the walls. And there's like a ghost freaking everybody out. You can see the lava maze here is very nice, but it can be very painful if they end up like back at room 1. And it does say there's a 50% chance of creatures coming back, so it's not guaranteed they have to fight everything again. But again, if the players just have really, really bad luck, I could see this turning into a slog. And my DM advice looking at this would be to maybe fudge things around a bit if the players start getting frustrated. I'm hoping they would enjoy this. I think it is really enjoyable. There's enough interesting thing happening. There's like an arena here with everybody transforming to beasts. There's enough cool things happening here. But that being said, it is very combat focused in almost every room, which, combat is slow in D&D. That can slow things down, and this whole thing can be very slow and turn into a slog quickly if they end up fighting the same fights over and over again. It does end very, very well. It's a very cool ending here where there's a bunch of shadow demons here. Like they come up basically at a hedge maze, like, oh shit, we're back in the hedge maze area. But then they exit this door, and there's a river of maggots, which is fucking cool. That they have to like hop across these platforms, or they could climb the walls. All those are skill checks. If they fall into the maggots, of course, they take damage and become poison and all this. But then on the other side is the boss demon of the maze. There's this giant bestial demon. I believe it's a custom stat block at the end, which again, as I said, there's a lot of monsters in this adventure, and even a lot of custom ones. And it just throws spells at players the whole time they're trying to cross this river. And then right in front of it is a pressure plate where these fucking, just the walls just slam together with spikes, and it literally says like a meat tenderizer, just which is fantastic. So just a horrifying situation here. And I love it when you create a boss monster that's not just a big powerful guy, but actually, or girl, but actually has like environmental hazards the players have to traverse and use abilities that they have. Maybe they've got like boots of flying, or they've got some kind of teleportation spell, or that can have those abilities come in really, really handy here. But that's a really cool way of ending this maze. I just love this maze in general. I think it's a really cool, it's thematic, it's fun. It's something I haven't seen a lot of being used. It reminds me of a Zelda dungeon where you move from like room to room. The whole screen shifts over as you go, and then enemies can be there. You have to figure out how to go from room to room, and it's a fun way of doing a maze, and I think it's an effective way of doing a maze in D&D, and even usable in tabletop. Like I said, you could do that in Roll20 because the maze is just whichever room you come out of, whichever direction you leave that room depends on which maze you end up in. So I think this is the right way to do a maze, and I just think this looks like a lot of fun. Like I really want to run this maze almost just as its own little one-shot that the players end up in this just fucked up maze area. But once they get to the end, they defeat the demon. Then they go to, and you can see just great artwork and notes throughout. I'm using the maps because these dungeons are so big. The maps are just the best way for me to organize my thoughts as I'm describing it. We go to Baphomet's lair, which is another dungeon. So we started with the Eternal Battlefield, which was sort of a dungeon in of its own, although it's kind of open. It even mentions you can't long rest up there because it's literally this ongoing warfare. So, not a traditional dungeon crawl, but still kind of a dungeon. Then you go into that maze, which is pretty fucked. And now you go into like the third layer, which is probably just the most traditional dungeon crawl out of them all. Now, it's pretty cool. My complaint here is the way it's organized is very confused. And there's some more errors in here, oddly enough. They start at 0 right here in this portal. And the way that I think dungeons should be organized is from the player's perspective, right? Because as the DM, I'm looking at, okay, where do the players appear, and then what do they start seeing as they come out of this dungeon? Now, it gets trickier when you have branching paths, and, you'll have to skip around a little bit. But in general, I think it should be oriented to the players. That's not done here. Here it's done sort of left to right, top down, but then the corridors are all, for some reason, given like their own. It just doesn't. It's just this weird like circle pattern. I don't know. It's very weird to look at the numbers and then see where they are. To where I had to constantly look back at this map and be like, okay, what the hell? So actually, the first thing they see is 5 or 6, and then they go around and there's 13 here, and then and there's a straight up error. 11 says it's a corridor with a single creature in it, whereas here 11 denotes the boss room, and 14 is supposed to be the boss room. So I don't know if those numbers are just switched or if anything else is screwed up, but that's obviously kind of a problem there. Easy fix, I would think. But and there's a number of little mechanical problems. There was like another mention of like when all 3 demons are killed, and obviously there were 4 demons there. And there was one that was like Eastern Passage when it should have obviously been the Western Passage. So it's things that a spell checker isn't going to obviously flag. It's something that you have to know like the content of what's going on and then edit it. And this is a big adventure, 60 plus pages. But it needed like an errata or another pass or a patch or something to fix some of these mistakes that are coming up. This one reminds me mostly of a Castlevania dungeon because it is demons, rituals going on, imprisoning people, torturing people, summoning demons, blood sacrifices, demons eating people. You get the drift here, right? 8 has a 9th level spellcaster mage you can rescue, which is a pretty great ally to grab. And I like that concept because too often, and especially in like demon dungeon crawls and stuff, it's just your players just can go into pure murder hobo mode, and that's fine. A lot of groups like that, where you're just killing things and looting things. It's just Diablo, basically. But I like it when you can include, at least let the players feel like heroes by rescuing people, and they can feel good about themselves for that, but also mechanically, like, oh, we literally just added an ally to our party, and that boosts our strength. So it can make the players feel good about actually doing good rather than just killing things. You're saving someone, and we literally made ourselves stronger by rescuing this person. Now, the ones in 6, I think, are just commoners in prison. So one of them does have like a brooch of shielding that she can give you, but that one in 8 can straight up like join your party, which is pretty cool. But otherwise, there's just monsters in basically all these rooms. There are a few traps, which are nice to see. One here is like a demonic armory, so it's just a big old loot pile, which is nice to reward players with, I think. Not every room has to be just a fucking awful, horrendous horrorscape. The main point of this dungeon is to go up to 3 here and fight the Pale Knight, which is supposed to be the mother of Baphomet, I believe, this really creepy demon woman, who you can tell on the map, which, by the way, these maps are fantastic. Has a giant hand for a tower made of like bone, and she's got you can see right here, the chamber is home to bone construct and crawling claws, and the tower is actually basically a monster with its own stat block, and it kind of acts like Bigby's hand, where it can smash it has a 50-foot range, holy crap, and can grapple, which is really fun. There's just again, it's kind of an environmental hazard that the players have to deal with, and then of course the boss lady is like on top of the tower, so the players have to get to her, which is really neat. And defeating her will essentially unlock the door to the boss. But then in front of the boss is another sub-boss, which is another demon. I believe a Naufacines, which is just big, like, teleport. I think it's a CR13 demon that can teleport around, and he's, like, feasting on, a dwarf or something when you come in there, which is pretty messed up. Just really good stuff all around, and the final boss fight against Baphomet is suitably epic. I'm actually going to go down to that spot, which I want to mention real quick on the maps. This is the exact map I want to see when I'm talking about maps. So a lot of adventures I kind of piss and moan about the maps, and it's done in that kind of Adventurers League, black ink on white graph paper style. When I talk about I want good maps, this is a good map. This is a good map. This is a map that if I open up the Dungeon Masters Guild, I think I would see this map in there. It's got that aesthetic. There's not a whole lot of detail in this map, but there's a little bit of detail. Like there's the pit in 5 you can see. There's a bunch of blood soaked in 7. That hand is there at 3. And, the sigil here, the runes. That's fine. Like there's other stuff obviously going on. There's monsters and there's body parts and there's things. And I can fit that in as tokens on a map. For Roll20 purposes, I can add all that in there. That's great. But starting with a baseline of this is fantastic. Now, and I haven't checked on this. I should have checked on this. But the one thing I would request on top of all this is a gridless version of this map. I still want the gridded version so that I can obviously look at it and see the size of everything and note how big, rooms are and all that. But trying to put a gridded map into Roll20's grid is a horrendous nightmare because you have to try to measure it and fit, and if it doesn't fit exactly, then that screws up all those lines and it just looks really bad. So, but having a non-gridded map means I don't have to worry about that at all. So that, for purely Roll20 purposes, having non-gridded maps works beautifully, but at the minimum I do want the gridded map on there so I can at least obviously see the size difference, and obviously there's a player version of this that is included in this adventure. This is just the PDF version that has the numbers on there. But +1 on the maps. Really, really good maps. All around. At this point, the only map I would have to add would be for battles in the on that first battlefield, Eternal Battlefield level, because you can't actually battle on that hex grid map. You would have to do like the classic RPG, like zoom in, to the actual battle screen, and at that point I would just throw together a random map that kind of looks like it would be there and just use that for all the encounters. So that's not a big deal, and I'm not going to take it away from that because I don't expect random encounter stuff to be mapped, but dungeons should be mapped, and they should look like this, frankly. Alright, so the boss battle against Baphomet is suitably epic. You might be wondering, well, how do my players at level 8, and they're not level 8, they actually level up, I believe, twice during this adventure, which it's an epic adventure at that point. I believe they make it to 9 in the maze, and then 10 in Baphomet's lair, so they should be 10 by the time they are fighting the Prince of Beasts in his throne room. But still, that's a high-level demon, and the answer is he's weakened. He's a CR 18, which there's a stat block for him here in this adventure because his ritual is not quite complete. I feel like that's always a thing you have to do when fighting these big demons, is you have to weaken them somehow because they're so powerful. And because most players don't get high level, I noticed. That happens in a lot of cases. But he's got as his allies the demonic versions of the Minotaur boss and the Orc boss, which you fought the Minotaur boss as the boss of the first layer. Remember, you fought Astarte in her house before you went down to the maze, and now you fight her again as a minion of the final boss, which is a really cool way of driving home the fact that, oh shit, this is a big bad. But if you destroy one or both of them, that actually weakens the final boss, which is a cool way. It's a very video game thing to do. And it's not something I would tell my players. I would tell them once one of them was killed, then I would be like, oh, you notice power draining from the Demon Lord as the minion falls. And then I would have to, again, in Roll20, I would create 3 different, maybe even 4, because it's 3. This is first minion death. Multiple character sheets for Baphomet, basically, because trying to do all of these, the wisdom ability score is reduced, perception reduced, max hit points reduced. Trying to do all of that in the middle of a big fight seems way too crazy for a DM to handle. So I would just create separate character sheets, and obviously just carry over the hit points that they've done. Every time they destroyed one of them, I would just replace it with that new character sheet. And then actually, you would have to have more than 3 because you don't know which one they're going to destroy at first. So that would make one sheet, and then another sheet would be if they destroyed that one first, and then the final sheet would be if they destroyed both of them and it's in its most weakened state. But that's a nice thing to do. It's a nice thing to see, is that they have that tactic. And I do like that tactics are actually spelled out for Baphomet. So when you are using him, and this happens to me as a DM, is I know, admittedly, I can be overwhelmed and not use monsters to the best of their abilities. As a DM, you're always macroing everything, and it can be harder to micromanage individual creatures, especially if you're handling a lot of things at once. And in this case, it helps a lot having the adventure actually spell out, okay, look, round 1, Baphomet uses Frightful Presence, then uses legendary action to attack with his Heart Cleaver. And then round 2, he casts Hunter's Mark, and then uses multi-attack action on that marked target. And then just goes into that, and then it's finally round 4, it's just return to round 1, repeat. So it's like, look, if you want to run it this way, just have him go through this scripted, like a Castlevania boss, where it just has this scripted line of attacks where the players can kind of figure out, like the tactics and how to counter them, which I think can work really well. And it's just nice to have that. And again, for any adventure, I like to see that. I like to see tactics spelled out for really tough boss monsters. Epilogue, there's not much going on. They get a bunch of loot, and the rift is sealed, but like there's that part of the land is just covered in the bodies of humans and minotaurs and orcs, and everything's just kind of fucked up looking. I mean, demons are bad news, kids. But you did at least steal him away, so that's a good, at least. And then they'll level up to level 11. Presumably for any other adventures you want to do, although the Minotaur trilogy has concluded in a really epic fashion. Before I go to my pros and cons, we can look at the monsters and men. The stat blocks here, and there's a lot. I was really impressed. It kept making reference to like an Ankashar, and I literally tried to look that up, and I was like, I don't know what that is. And finally I realized, oh, okay, that's a unique demon that you created. NPCs are here too, but you can see a lot of Baphomet here. There's a CR18 version of Baphomet. Bone constructs. Bulazu. This one was also confused because they actually added, Wizards added a Bulazu in, I believe, Mordenkainen's, and it's a way different creature than this. It's kind of a weak CR3 demon, whereas here it's a much more powerful CR9 demon. So don't be confused about seeing Bulazu. What they should have done here is every time they mention a monster, do that thing where in parentheses you say like monster manual page whatever, or Mordenkainen's page of whatever, or in this case it would have been Appendix A, and that would have immediately clued me into, okay, this is a custom monster. So I would have liked to see that. Just kind of another thing about the organization of this. Obviously I like seeing every time a creature is used, have it be bolded, but also have it in parentheses where I can find that creature. I hope I'm not talking about my ass and that was used earlier and just I missed it. I don't think. Let's go. Yeah, so like a Tanaruk. Like it mentions Tanaruk here, and I had no idea what a fucking Tanaruk is. I mean, obviously some of this stuff like Cultist, Shadow Demon, Vrock, I know that's from the Monster Manual, but somebody might read this and not realize that. And I feel like there needs to be some kind of sourcing of that material just to make it easier to realize, like, okay, where can I actually find this creature? I believe a Tanaruk is found down here. It's time to load now because I just scooted around. You can see there's custom stat blocks for the Demonic Astarte, Daedalus, all these mini bosses. That Gur demon, I believe that was the boss of the maze, is a CR15. This is a very challenging fight, guys, girls. It's a very challenging fight. The Pale Knight, very creepy creatures all over here too. There's Perseus again. Not a whole lot of custom magic items. There is one note I want to make about this cursed ring of X-ray vision. You find a ring of X-ray vision, but it's cursed, and it will literally melt your eyeballs out of your face and turn you permanently blind. Wow, that's terrible. It does like a -1 to your vision checks each day, I think. The end of each long rest. They gain a -1 and then eventually become blind. That's horrifying. Very thematically appropriate, though. Alright, let's go over my quick pros and cons. Zoink. For Minotaur's Bane. Pro. Uses past characters and events from the Minotaur trilogy in meaningful ways. It does. I think it uses Astarte, it uses, what was that guy's name? Fuck, I already forgot. The Orcs guy's name. Perseus obviously can join you. It's a really cool way, and the Eternal Battlefield is like all like previous locations from the adventure. So it just ties things together and really does feel like a good conclusion to those previous adventures. Pro, it has fantastic battle maps, as well as a great overland map of the Abyssal Rift. I adore these maps. This is how you do maps in adventures. This is what I want to see with maps. That overland map even was going to work very well, and I could use that. I'd put a little icon representing the party and have them move around hex to hex. That can work very well. I would have to add a random encounter battle map, but I don't expect the adventure to provide that. But I do expect the good dungeon maps, and they are here for sure. Pro, tons of custom NPCs and monsters. We just saw them. There's a bunch. I do wish they were organized to where it would tell you if they were in the appendix or if they could be found somewhere else. But that's kind of a quibbling complaint. It's all the information is there somewhere. Pro, the Eternal Battlefield provides a good mix of overland adventure, random encounters, chase sequences, and mini dungeons. It's a really, really neat location with a lot going on. I was very impressed. Pro, the Maze of the Minotaur is clever, lengthy, and challenging, and could translate well to virtual tabletops, as I mentioned, by kind of turning off global illumination and making the vision very small. I think you could even do a maze there because it's segmented from room to room. You would have to, as a DM, just be aware if things are getting frustrating and your players are repeating some areas or attacks, then that can be a bummer. But that's not on the adventure. They're just, you need to be aware of like how things are going. In other words, that maze is trial and error. And if the error is too much, then you can, I think, adjust it on the fly, hopefully. And Pro, the final epic boss battle versus Baphomet, Prince of Beasts, is just awesome. It's great. Like, yes, I want a final epic boss battle to my adventure. It brings back the two leaders as demons, which is awesome. There's actually a note about the fact that he's got this pendant that prevents him from being banished, which is kind of a cheap way of getting rid of demons, but you have to then be able to attack that thing, and then you can knock it off the chain, and then you could at least... So there are steps involved where he's not immune to banishing, but you have to proactively do things in order to open him up to that possibility in case your party has those kind of spells, which is a nice note. But I also like the fact that the tactics are spelled out, and that if you defeat his minions, that actually weakens him mechanically pretty significantly, which is a solid strategy. Cons, there are several errors, such as misnumbering foes, or pointing to an eastern passage instead of a western one. I was going to say my other con, but I'll kind of tie that into my second con. But so that's just, there's a couple errors in here that make things confusing. Like Baphomet's domain has the weird numbers switched around. But that actually is going to be my other con, is I just think that dungeon is organized very strangely, the way the numbers are annotated. Not for players aren't going to know this, but for a DM trying to read it and organize it, I just feel like it needed to be either just 1, 2, 3, like top to bottom, left to right, or done from the orient of the player, from where they start, and then do like 1, 2, and 3 are right near them, and kind of take like a path that they would take, and then have the final room be the one furthest in that upper right corner. So I would do... One of those two would have made sense to me. Neither of those are used, and it just makes trying to read it and figure out where things are a little more confusing than necessary. Final verdict for Minotaur's Bane. Minotaur's Bane provides fun mazes, horrible demons, and large-scale warfare in an action-packed epic conclusion to the Minotaur trilogy. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. And you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.